It all began when a 4-year-old boy spoke a sentence that would shake the greatest theologians in the world. That morning, the air of Jerusalem smelled of warm stone and freshly baked bread. Lucia Ramirez took her son's hand and climbed the museum steps as if crossing an invisible threshold. Samuel Ortega, with honey-colored eyes and a quiet attentiveness, walked at his own rhythm, as though each step carried a music only he could hear. Lucia had traveled with him from Guadalajara, after months of intensity. Between therapies and evaluations, doctors repeated the same thing with slight variations. A typical development, high sensitivity, unusual memory. She nodded, asked questions, took notes. At night, Samuel would fall asleep copying symbols no one had ever taught him. Small constellations of strokes that appeared on blank pages, on napkins, even on the fogged glass of the window. It was his way of calming the storm inside, Lucia thought, and perhaps, just perhaps, a way of speaking to something she did not understand. They crossed the museum's main hall, and a guard politely pointed them toward the ancient manuscripts section. Lucia thanked him with a tense smile. She expected nothing extraordinary. She only wanted a calm outing, a distraction. To see displays, read the plaques, have ice cream afterward. That was all. But Samuel did not look like other children looked. He didn't point at the wooden toys, didn't stop at the sparkling glass cases. He walked straight ahead, as if guided by an invisible thread. He stopped before an unremarkable display. Inside rested a modest manuscript, yellowed papyrus, dark ink, delicate stitching. The label said its origin was uncertain, and its dating still debated. Lucia read softly, out of her teacher's habit, possible Galilean provenance, mixture of Aramaic and unidentified markings. Recent discovery. Samuel did not blink. "Mom," he said at last, "there sets a voice here." Lucia sighed. "It's such an old manuscript, sweetheart. Voices are in books, yes, but you have to read them." Samuel kept his gaze fixed. "It sits not in the book. It sits between the lines." A museum conservator passed nearby and half heard. He smiled kindly, distracted, and continued on. Lucia looked at her son tenderly, and the boy frowned, as if solving a puzzle. His fingers moved in the air without touching the glass, tracing an invisible path of symbols. The strokes he made at night seemed to find their place within the manuscript's geometry. "Don't touch," Lucia said gently. "Issup not going to touch," he replied. "Issup listening." Tourists murmured a few meters away. A group of students took notes in blue notebooks. A guide spoke about Hellenistic influences and trade routes. Everything seemed normal. Yet the silence around Samuel was different. It had formed without anyone noticing, a kind of sphere of calm, and at its center stood a still child, listening to a language that sounded nowhere. Lucia tried to move him to the next case. Samuel did not move. He had that serene firmness that sometimes exasperated her and sometimes broke her heart. His face showed focus, not fear. It was as if he were finally home. "Do you want to keep going?" she asked. "I want this to keep going," he said. The conservator returned. This time he stopped. His name tag read David Hazan. He asked if they needed help. Lucia replied that they were fine, just looking. David observed the boy with professional curiosity, a mixture of tenderness and experience. Many children grew bored or ran off. This one didn't. This one watched. "You've been standing here a while," David said kindly. "Do you like old letters?" Samuel didn't answer. He lifted his hand a centimeter, just a gesture, then let it fall. David didn't insist. He explained to Lucia that the manuscript was unusual for its apparent mix of writing systems, that some symbols matched nothing known, perhaps scribal marks or damage from time. Lucia nodded politely, grateful for the explanation, though in truth she was no longer listening. She was watching her son. "I sets like you to tell me what you see," she said softly. "Don't just invent anything. Don't just force it, just tell me what you see." Samuel took a slow breath, like someone preparing for cold water. He looked at the margins, then back to the center, planted his feet, steadied his shoulders, then he spoke. "It isn't set a full story. It sets small rays, like when you close your eyes and the sunlight filters through. There's sets a handwriting, and another hand above it, but not touching, just accompanying." Lucia swallowed hard. "Accompanying whom?" "A child," Samuel said. "He seems ill. He walks slowly. There's seps water nearby. There's seps water nearby. There's seps water. There's seps water nearby. There's seps water nearby." Lucia blinked. The museum world went on, but something opened inside her. David shifted posture, suddenly alert. Flying birds, he repeated, more to himself than to the others. Samuel continued. There's SIP's a name that repeats. It isn't set written the same way each time. Sometimes it sets like a whisper. Sometimes like the strike of a hammer. Lucia leaned closer. What name? The boy closed his eyes, as if the answer lived not in the signs but in the silence. Jonah, he said. David tensed, not because of the name, but because of the certainty with which it was spoken. He took a folder of printed sheets and opened it, showing a reproduction of the lower line of the manuscript, where small marks seemed erratic. He explained to Lucia that no one knew what they meant. They could mean nothing. Scholars still debated. Samuel pointed without touching.
That isn't set a mark, it sets a direction. And that over there isn't set damage. It sets a pause. It sets used when the writer is tired or sad.
Samuel's voice was flat, without drama, yet everything seemed to vibrate. Lucia felt her heart beating in her throat. It wasn't faith, it wasn't science, it was something else, a strange border where both could exist. David asked permission to call a colleague. Lucia agreed. A woman with tied-back hair and delicate hands, used to handling fragile papers, appeared. She introduced herself as Tamar Ben-Zivi. She greeted them softly and looked into the display. Samuel didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the manuscript, as if someone had told him not to stop. There's SIP's signature, he said. Lucia smiled faintly. People don't set sign at the edge, Samuel. That's not a signature like the ones you know, Mom. That's a promise written at the end. Tamar leaned closer. She whispered that the lower section, barely visible, held strokes once thought ornamental. Using a sidelight, she illuminated the border. The signs turned into shadows, and the shadows into a path. David exhaled. Lucia held her breath. Samuel spoke more slowly now, as if translating a whisper that might shatter. It says that whoever reads without having learned will know where to look when the time comes. And it says that Jesus had a friend who saw him when no one else did, someone who didn't set right to convince, but to remember. Lucia stepped back. She felt the weight of the world on her shoulders and at the same time something light, fragile, like the edge of a truth that astonishes. She wanted to say something rational, that it was coincidence, that her son remembered stories from catechism, that he was repeating something he'd heard. But Samuel had never learned catechism. Lucia had raised him among questions, not answers. And that detail, that different tremor, changed her breathing. David asked Tamar to call the floor coordinator. A middle-aged man with a serious face arrived, listened, asked 2 questions, and spoke over the radio. A simple protocol. Lucia signed a quick form, allowing Samuel to remain longer before the display without causing commotion. No cameras were raised. No spectacle formed. It was an intimate circle within the world. Lucia knelt to bring her face level with her son's. Do you want water? Do you want to sit? Do you want to leave? She asked, voice trembling between tenderness and fear. I want to stay, he said. Not long, just until it tells me what SIP's missing. What's missing? David asked, unable to hide the urgency in his tone. A place and a certainty, Samuel replied. Minutes passed without clocks. Lucia remembered her classroom, where she told students that history is a conversation between old voices and new ears. She remembered the nights she held Samuel when he couldn't sleep and promised him that someday everything would make sense. Now those threads crossed. Samuel tilted his head slightly to the left, his gesture when something fit. His fingers traced an invisible triangle in the air. Tamar watched and mimicked the movement, as if the body might understand what the mind could not. David rested his palms on his thighs, expectant. Now, Samuel said in a whisper, now I can read. Lucia felt the room fall silent. Distant voices faded, footsteps turned to velvet, lights seemed to dim. Samuel leaned close enough for his eyes to reflect the papyrus texture. He moved his lips soundlessly for a few seconds, then spoke, not loudly, not solemnly, only clear, as one who fulfills a simple and sacred duty. Here speaks a secret friend of Jesus. The echo of Samuel's words still floated through the museum hall. Here speaks a secret friend of Jesus. The phrase repeated in the minds of everyone present, a whisper that could not be ignored. Lucia Ramirez stood motionless, her heart pounding. Her son, barely 4 years old, had spoken those words with a serenity that unsettled her. There had been no trace of doubt, no fear, only certainty. The conservator David Hazan called the director of the museum's Department of Papyrology, Dr. Amir Khalid, one of the most respected authorities on ancient text translation. In less than 15 minutes, the man arrived with 2 assistants. He carried a folder under his arm and wore the expression of someone who had dropped everything for something urgent. His gaze was direct, scientific, yet filled with restrained curiosity. "Where is the manuscript?" he asked. David pointed toward the display and explained what had happened, though each time he said the boy's name, his voice dropped slightly, as if he feared disturbing some order he could not comprehend. Amir studied the papyrus. At first glance, the letters were a tangle of lines and curves, but something about their layout disturbed him. He leaned closer, adjusted his glasses, and murmured something in Arabic, almost to himself. "This cannot be," he said finally. "There sits a mix of ancient Aramaic with early Hebrew but also symbols that match no known record." Lucia listened without speaking. Samuel remained silent, his eyes fixed on the manuscript. Amir noticed and frowned. "And him?" he asked cautiously. "My son," Lucia replied. "He was the first one to speak." Amir straightened. "What exactly did he say?" Lucia repeated the boy's words. Amir laced his fingers and rested them on the table. He had translated texts no one else could read, but he had never heard anything like this. He decided to test him. "Could you tell me, little one, what you see here?" he asked gently, pointing to a section in the upper corner. Samuel did not answer immediately. He moved a little closer, tilting his head slightly as he studied the strokes. "There are 3 voices," he said at last. "One writes, one dictates, and another just listens." A shiver ran down Amir's spine. He tried to hide it with an academic gesture. "Could you read a part for me?" The boy nodded. His tone was calm, unaffected. "It says that a boy named Jesus had a friend. His name was Jonah. They played near a stream where there was mud and yellow flowers. Jonah couldn't set run, but Jesus taught him how to fly without moving." The people around them exchanged incredulous looks. Amir stared at the boy with a mixture of respect and confusion. To fly without moving? How did he do that? Samuel smiled with an innocence that contrasted with the gravity of his words. He showed him how to do it with faith. It isn't set flying with the body, it sets flying with the soul. Lucia felt her eyes fill with tears. She knew her son could not be inventing this, not with that level of detail, not with that clarity. Amir grabbed a notebook and began writing rapidly. Then he looked up. "Could you point to where it says that, Samuel?" The boy extended his finger and, without touching the glass, indicated an exact spot on the parchment. Amir compared it to the translation notes already made by the research team. Indeed, that very line had been classified as indecipherable. Tamar Ben Zavi, the specialist who had been with them, exhaled. "We spent months trying to translate that section," she said. "What the boy just said matches a hypothesis we had about a children's SIP story, but no one could confirm it." Amir said nothing. He continued observing the boy with narrowed eyes. Logic clashed against the inexplicable inside him. He had seen feats of intellect before, but never anything like this. "Samuel," he said softly, "do you know who wrote this?" The boy turned his head and looked at him directly. "It wasn't written by a scholar," he said. "It was written by the one who saw everything." The answer disarmed him. Amir took a slow breath. "And who saw everything?" "The one who was with Jesus when he was a child," Samuel whispered. "His friend." A long, heavy silence filled the room. Outside, the sounds of the museum continued as usual, but inside that hall, time seemed to have stopped. Amir approached the display and asked that the lights be dimmed to protect the papyrus. Then he turned to Lucia. "This must be studied," he said with a reverence that bordered on awe. "If this text is authentic, it could be the most important discovery in 2 millennia. Lucia nodded, though not fully aware of the magnitude of what was happening. She thought only of Samuel, how she would protect him from the attention that was surely coming. Amir requested that the manuscript be moved to the museum's laboratory for detailed observation. The transfer had to be done under strict conservation measures. Lucia and Samuel were invited to accompany the process. The laboratory smelled of parchment and ancient dust. The lights were cold and precise. Amir placed the manuscript on a glass table beneath an electronic magnifier. Magnified on the screen, the text revealed an irregular texture, as though it had been written by several hands at different times. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a section. "Here the letters change size. It's as if someone interrupted the writing and then resumed it with another intent." Samuel stepped forward without fear. That set's because they didn't set write it at the same time, he explained. One was writing and the other was remembering. Amir looked puzzled. How do you know that? Because the ink of memory is softer, the boy replied. Lucia closed her eyes for a moment. That way of speaking, poetic yet precise, was his language whenever something completely absorbed him. Amir gave an order to his assistants. One adjusted the camera for high-resolution imaging. The other took microscopic samples from the edge. The preliminary results indicated that the document was more than 16 centuries old. I don't understand, Amir murmured. Its state of preservation is impossible. Tamar, who had been watching silently, spoke with a tone between admiration and fear. Maybe we are not looking at a text that tried to survive, she said. Maybe it sets a text that chose to be found. Amir didn't respond. He couldn't. Every word the boy spoke aligned with things they had only suspected. It was as if Samuel were hearing an echo that adults had forgotten how to listen to. Hours passed, the lamps hummed softly. Samuel showed no sign of fatigue. He remained still, absorbed. At one point Lucia approached and whispered in his ear. Sweetheart, do you want to rest? He shook his head. It hasn't finished speaking yet, he said. The part where Jesus says goodbye is still missing. Amir looked at him with growing unease. Jesus says goodbye? To whom? Samuel lowered his voice. To Jonah, the sick boy. He tells him that one day they shall meet again, in another place where no one mocks and where walking doesn't set hurt. Lucia felt a knot tighten in her chest. Her son had spent years barely saying a few words in a row, and now he spoke with the fluency of an adult reciting a memory lived. Amir sat down slowly. This defies all logic, he murmured. One of his assistants approached with a digital dating report. Amir read it, frowned, then read it again. The analysis indicates the ink contains particles used only in manuscripts from the 4th century, he said. And yet there are overlapping strokes that are older. That means someone added text centuries after the original. Tamar looked at him, astonished. As if a memory had been rewritten by another hand, she said. Amir nodded. Samuel looked up. Because what is remembered never dies, he said. It just changes form until someone listens again. A chill ran through Amir. He was a scientist, not a believer. But in that moment before that child and that impossible manuscript, he felt he was standing before something that did not belong solely to the academic world. Lucia took her son's hand. It was warm, firm, calm. Samuel, she asked gently, what else does it say? The boy looked at the parchment once more. His honey-colored eyes reflected the ancient letters as if absorbing them. It says that whoever reads these words must do so with an open heart, he said, because they were written by the one who saw everything. Amir met his gaze. Who Samuel, who saw everything? The boy smiled softly. The friend of Jesus, he said. It wasn't set written by an ordinary man. It was written by the one who saw everything. Dr. Amir Khalid watched the glowing laboratory screen with his hands interlaced. 3 days had passed since Samuel Ortega had spoken those impossible words, and the entire team was working without rest. The manuscript revealed fragments of a story that seemed to move between the divine and the human. It mentioned a cave, a stream, and a repeated symbol that none of the experts could decipher. 3 interlaced lines ending in a spiral. Lucia Ramirez watched her son draw that same symbol in his notebook without ever having seen it before. He did it with precision, as if his fingers remembered something that his mind simply obeyed. Every time he finished the drawing, Samuel spoke the same sentence in an almost reverent tone. The witness guarded the words. Driven by a mixture of awe and scientific obsession, Dr. Amir organized an expedition to Nazareth. If the manuscript was real, the cave had to exist, and if it existed, it might contain the definitive proof that the text was not a late invention. They would travel with a small team. 3 archaeologists, 2 linguists, 1 cameraman, and of course Samuel and his mother. The idea of taking a child on an archaeological expedition seemed absurd, but Amir insisted. The manuscript will not open without him, he said. It is not about understanding the words, but about feeling them. Lucia agreed, though fear tightened in her chest. She knew her son was not an ordinary child, but each step of this journey took him a little further from the normal world she had tried to protect him from. The drive from Jerusalem to Nazareth took nearly 3 hours along the road. The arid landscape stretched beneath a cloudless sky. Samuel, seated by the window, did not take his eyes off the hills. He did not speak, but his face held a serene concentration, as if he were listening to something far away. "What are you thinking about, my love?" Lucia asked. "About the stones," he replied without turning. "They remember." From the front seat, Dr. Amir glanced back. "What do they remember, Samuel?" "The day he came here." Silence filled the vehicle. No one asked anything else. When they reached Nazareth, the dense heat of midday greeted them. The modern city rose over the ruins of the old one, and in its narrow streets there was still an air of history. The team settled in a small inn on the outskirts, overlooking a spread of hills dotted with dry shrubs and olive trees. That same afternoon they began the search. According to the manuscript's translation, the cave had to be found roughly 2,000 steps north of the main well, beside 3 olive trees forming a triangle. Amir traced the coordinates on a satellite map, and the group set out with cameras, detectors, and flashlights. Samuel walked ahead, holding his mother's hand. He did not seem tired or confused. He moved with steady steps, like someone returning to a familiar place. From time to time he stopped, touched a stone, or closed his eyes for a few seconds before continuing. "It is not the map that is guiding him," whispered Tamar, the linguist. "It is someone else's memory." After more than an hour of walking, Samuel stopped before a cluster of twisted olive trees. 3 of them formed a perfect triangle. A shiver ran through Lucia. "Here," the boy said, pointing to the ground. "Beneath this earth the voice is sleeping." The team unfolded their tools. The excavation began carefully, clearing the upper layer of dust and stones. They soon uncovered a large rock with an unusual shape, almost like a heart split by a central crack. Amir knelt and ran his hand over its surface. "This is old," he murmured. "Very old." Using levers and ropes, the archaeologist shifted the rock. When they finally managed to move it, a dark opening appeared, breathing a cold, dense air. Lucia stepped back. "Is it safe?" she asked. "We will find out," Amir answered, fastening a light to his helmet. Samuel stepped forward. "I will go first." Lucia gripped his arm firmly. "No, Samuel. Wait for the adults." The boy looked at her calmly. "I cannot wait. It is calling." Amir hesitated for a few seconds, then nodded. They tied a rope to the boy's harness and switched on 3 flashlights. Samuel descended slowly, followed by Amir and Timur. The tunnel was narrow at first. Then it opened into a wider chamber where the air smelled of damp earth and forgotten centuries. The walls were covered in carvings. They were not words but symbols, circles, intersecting lines, tiny human figures. They seemed to dance under the light of the flashlights. Amir stepped closer and took photographs. "These carvings match no known style," he said, fascinated. "Some resemble Aramaic, but others are entirely new." Samuel walked slowly, brushing the air before the inscriptions. "They are not writings," he said. "They are thoughts trapped in stone." Watching from the entrance, Lucia felt her knees tremble. It was as if the cave were breathing. Each wall seemed to tell something in silence. "Here the witness hid," the boy went on. "Here he wrote when no one listened." At the center of the cave, a stone slab rose slightly from the floor. Resting on it, wrapped in linen, lay something half buried in dust. Amir knelt carefully and began to clear the earth with a brush. The linen was stiff with age, yet it still held its shape. "It looks like a small bundle," Tamar said. "Perhaps a ritual object." Samuel came closer and placed his hands on his knees without touching anything. "It is not an object," he said. "It is a word that never finished speaking." Amir nodded with solemnity. "Let us open it carefully." Wearing gloves and using tweezers, he unwrapped the linen. Inside was a small parchment sealed with a layer of dark wax. The seal bore the very symbol Samuel had been drawing again and again. 3 interlaced lines ending in a spiral. Lucia held her breath. "Samuel," she whispered, "do you know what that is?" The boy stared at the seal without blinking. "Yes," he said at last. "It is the mark of the witness." Amir examined the object under the light. The parchment was surprisingly well preserved, protected from the air by the seal. He noted measurements, took photos, and then turned to the boy. "What does this mark mean, Samuel?" The boy looked at him with a blend of innocence and wisdom. "It means the words are not to be read with the eyes but with the soul." Silence returned to fill the cave. Tamar looked away, visibly moved. Lucia knelt beside her son and took his hand. "Who wrote this, my son?" Samuel lifted his gaze toward the rock vault. "The friend of Jesus, the one who saw what no one else saw." Amir placed the parchment in a conservation box and sealed it. Then he turned to the group. "We will return to Jerusalem. This must be analyzed in the laboratory, but what we have found here could change everything. As they climbed back to the surface, the evening air wrapped around them. The sun hid behind the hills, tinting the sky in orange and purple. Lucia looked at her son, who kept walking with the serenity of someone who has fulfilled an ancient promise. "Are you all right, my love?" she asked. Samuel nodded without looking back. "Yes, but this is not history," he said softly. "It is a message." Lucia embraced him, still not fully understanding, while the shadows of the afternoon stretched over the land that had kept its silence for so many centuries. The museum laboratory in Jerusalem had become a silent, tense, almost sacred place. Specialists worked under cold lights that would not harm the ancient materials. The small parchment found in the cave rested inside a sealed glass chamber, as if it held a secret capable of changing the world. Dr. Amir Khalid could not take his eyes off it. It had been brought with extreme care, protected between layers of linen and purified air. From a corner, Lucia Ramirez watched with her hands clasped together. Samuel, sitting beside her, was drawing in his notebook the same symbol he had seen in the cave, 3 interlaced lines ending in a spiral. Hours passed before Amir decided to break the wax seal. When he did, the sound was so faint that no one breathed. Ancient air escaped its prison with an invisible sigh. Inside, the parchment slowly unfolded across the glass table. To the naked eye, the letters seemed to dance between 2 alphabets, one recognizable, the other unknown. "The texture of the material is flawless," murmured Temar Ben-Zivi, adjusting the digital magnifier, "and the ink is perfectly intact." Amir watched the first strokes in astonishment. The letters were Aramaic but intertwined with signs that matched no known human language. He called a technician and ordered carbon dating tests to begin. The results arrived 2 hours later. 33 after Christ, the technician announced, incredulous. Margin of error, 5 years. A deep silence filled the laboratory. Amir set the report on the table. He had spent his life working with ancient manuscripts, but he had never held anything in his hands that matched the time when, according to records, Jesus of Nazareth had lived. Lucia looked at her son. Samuel's eyes were closed. "What are you doing, love?" she asked tenderly. "Listening," the boy said without opening them. "The paper is still speaking." Amir approached cautiously. "Can you read it, Samuel?" The boy nodded and extended his hand over the glass. He did not touch the parchment. His palm simply hovered above it. His voice came out soft, steady. It was written by a young man named Elov. He was Jesus' friend when they were children. They walked together to the stream. Elov could not run because his leg was sick, but Jesus went with him every day. A chill ran down Amir Sep's back. "What else does it say?" Samuel continued with the calm tone of someone translating what he already knew. "Eliab says that Jesus was afraid of being different. Sometimes he cried at night because he did not understand why he could feel other people's sadness. One day when he saw a wounded bird, he placed his hands over it, and the bird flew again. That was when he understood that his gift was not only to heal bodies but to heal hearts." Lucia squeezed her son's hand, deeply moved. The words flowed from him as if they were rising from a sleeping memory. Amir recorded every sentence. The text matched fragments of unconfirmed apocryphal writings, yet it went far beyond them. "Go on, Samuel," he urged softly. The boy opened his eyes, which seemed to reflect the lamplight. Jesus told Eliab that God does not live in temples or on altars, but in every person's Set's heart, that even in the smallest one lives the same divine spark, and that one day the world would forget, but the words would remain hidden until someone without fear could read them. Tamar covered her mouth. Amir bowed his head. Those lines were too pure to be invented, too dangerous to go unnoticed. That night, the test results were leaked to the press. Within 24 hours, the news exploded across the world's major media outlets. Ancient parchment from year 33 reveals new words of Jesus. The internet flooded with theories, debates, and accusations. Some called it a miracle, others, blasphemy. Lucia and Samuel were moved to a secure residence under Israeli police protection. The family received threats and interview requests from all over the globe. The Catholic Church issued an official statement declaring it did not recognize the document's authenticity. Governments and universities requested access to the parchment. Dr. Amir was summoned before an international committee of experts. They questioned him for hours, but his answers never changed. The document is real, the dating is accurate, and its content cannot be ignored. Reactions polarized. In the streets of Jerusalem, demonstrations erupted. Pilgrims prayed outside the museum. begging that the parchment be shown to the public. Others shouted that it should be destroyed before it caused chaos. Exhausted, Lucia barely slept. At night, Samuel woke up startled. He said he could hear voices, not threats, but memories. One dawn, she found him standing at the window, looking at the distant lights of the city. "They don't want to silence the truth," the boy said softly. "They want to silence love." Lucia hugged him without words. In that instant she understood that her son had not been the same since touching that manuscript, and perhaps never would be again. Days later, Amir decided to reveal part of the translated text at an international conference. Journalists filled the hall. With a firm voice, the archaeologist read one of the lines from the parchment. "God dwells in everyone, even in the smallest one. Whoever loves without fear will know my name without having learned it." The silence that followed was more powerful than any applause. Then came the headlines. A teaching that could shake centuries of doctrine. The hidden message of the child Christ. Faith or heresy. The debate dividing the world. Lucia and Samuel were moved again, this time to a monastery in the Judean desert, far from the noise of the media. Amir went with them, convinced the child's safety was at risk. On the road, Lucia asked the question she had feared for days. "Do you think Samuel is in danger?" Amir did not answer right away. "Knowledge is always dangerous," he said at last. "But in this case what frightens people is not what we know. It's what we might accept." At the monastery, a small group of monks welcomed them warmly. There, amid the mountain silence, Samuel seemed to find peace. He spent hours drawing symbols in the sand of the courtyard. The monks watched him with respect. One of them, Brother Elias, approached him one afternoon and asked what his drawings meant. "They are the doors of the soul," Samuel said. "Jesus knew them all." The monk lowered his gaze, deeply moved. Meanwhile, outside the monastery, the world burned in controversy. Some religious leaders declared the parchment an attempt to destroy faith. Others said it might open a new spiritual era. In the middle of the storm, the Israeli government decided to remove the document from the museum temporarily. The act was seen as censorship. Protests erupted, some peaceful, some violent. Lucia watched the news in silence. She felt the story had escaped their hands. What had begun as an academic search had become a global conflict. That night, when all seemed calm, Samuel fell asleep in a small cell of the monastery. Lucia covered him with a light blanket and stayed beside him, watching him sleep. Outside, the wind blew softly, carrying the desert dust. Suddenly, the boy began to murmur in his dreams. Lucia leaned closer to listen. "The second testimony sleeps beneath the waters," he whispered, trembling. "We must find it before they erase it." A chill ran through Lucia's body. She did not fully understand, but her heart knew those words were a sign. When Amir heard what had happened, his face went pale. He looked at Tamar with an expression of awe and fear. "If the first testimony was in the earth," he said slowly, "the second must be in the water." And so while the world argued over the parchment's authenticity, the real mystery was only beginning to awaken, beneath the still surface of the Sea of Galilee. The sunrise over the Sea of Galilee glowed with a golden hue, as if the sky itself knew it was about to witness something sacred. The waters were still, reflecting the mountains in the distance, and the air smelled of salt and herbs. Lucia Ramirez watched the horizon, her heart racing. Since that night in the monastery, when Samuel had spoken those words in his sleep, everything had changed. Dr. Amir Khalid had organized a new expedition with a team of underwater archaeologists. It was the only way to find out whether the second testimony truly slept beneath the waters, as the boy had said. Samuel seemed calm, untouched by the tension of the adults. He walked barefoot along the shore, letting the water brush against his ankles. His gaze was fixed on the center of the lake, where the sunlight shimmered intensely. "It sets there," he said simply.
"Deep down, but awake."
Amir exchanged a glance with Tamer Ben-Zivi. Both were used to interpreting data, not visions, yet something in the boy's tone made them doubt their own skepticism. He ordered the divers to prepare the equipment. The group carried high-resolution cameras, sonar and magnetic sensors. The coordinates Samuel had indicated matched a deep section about 200 meters from the eastern shore, a place with no prior archaeological record. "How do you know, Samuel?" asked Amir as he adjusted his vest. The boy stood on the sand, answering without hesitation. "Because the words float there. I can hear them, like when the wind touches the water." Lucia knelt in front of him and brushed his hair from his forehead. "Promise me you won't get too close to the edge, all right?" Samuel nodded. but his gaze remained fixed on the lake. The divers went in one by one, disappearing beneath the surface. For the first few minutes, everything was silent. Only the hum of the generators and the rhythmic tapping of waves filled the air. Then a voice crackled over the radio, breaking the stillness. "Dr. Khaled, we have found something," said the leader of the underwater team. "A rectangular structure under the sediment. Looks like a stone box carved from volcanic rock." Amir's heart skipped a beat. "Mark the exact position and begin extraction carefully," he ordered. The following hours stretched endlessly. From the shore, Lucia watched as the divers worked under the water, their blue beams sweeping across the depths. Samuel didn't move. His hands were crossed over his chest, his eyes closed, as if in prayer. By dusk, a small crane emerged from the pier, pulling a taut rope. Slowly, the box rose from the water, covered in algae and mud. It measured about 35 centimeters long, 20 wide and 15 deep. The material was black basalt, polished by centuries. Holding her breath, Tamar cleaned one of the stone's faces with a fine brush. There, carved with precision, appeared words in a mix of Hebrew and unknown symbols. "Translate them," Amir said quietly. Tamar blinked. "It says, 'For the one who listens to the words of silence.'" A shiver ran through Lucia's body. Samuel stepped forward.
"It's for me," he whispered.
Amir looked at him seriously. "Samuel, we don't yet know what sits inside." "It's not dangerous," said the boy. "It's waiting." The container was taken to a temporary laboratory set up near the pier. Under sterile lights, Amir used precision tools to break the seal. As he did, a faint scent of myrrh and damp wood filled the room. Inside was a dark linen wrapping, and something else that glimmered faintly in the light. Lucia leaned closer, holding her breath. In the center rested a small hummingbird carved from wood, so fine and delicate it seemed ready to take flight. Samuel took it in his hands without hesitation. The moment he touched it, he shut his eyes tightly. His body tensed, then relaxed. No one dared to interrupt him. "He's crying," Samuel murmured distantly. "Jesus is sitting by the lake. He's just a child. He has a piece of wood and a small knife. He's carving this hummingbird while the water shines behind him. He cries because he knows the world one tips to understand, but he keeps carving." Tears rolled down Samuel's cheeks. He says faith doesn't move mountains, it creates them. The silence that followed was absolute. Neither Amir nor Tamar could speak. Lucia approached slowly and caressed her son's head. "My love, are you all right?" Samuel took a deep breath and opened his eyes. "Yes, Mama," but he sat sad.
He says no one will remember what he tried to teach.
Amir carefully cleaned the inside of the box. There was a second parchment, smaller than the first, wrapped in purple silk. Its surface was covered in fine dust, but the writing was visible. "It looks like a continuation of the first," said Tamar. They placed it on a glass-topped table. Samuel leaned over it and began reading softly. Eliab writes again. He says Jesus taught him to see things not as they are, but as they could be. That when someone believes, they don't change the world they see, they change the world they feel. That love is not a miracle. It is the root of all miracles. Lucia's eyes filled with tears. Amir, deeply moved, took notes word for word. Samuel kept reading. Eliab says that before leaving, Jesus gave him the carved hummingbird. He told him that whenever fear visited, he should look at the bird and remember that wings are not learned, they are remembered. Dr. Amir, a man of science all his life, bowed his head. "This goes beyond any rational explanation," he whispered. Tamar, her voice trembling, added, "If these words are genuine, they will change how we understand faith." Outside, the wind began to rise. The waves crashed against the shore, as if the lake itself were responding to what was happening inside the tent. Lucia knelt beside her son. "What does all this mean, Samuel?" The boy clutched the hummingbird in his hands. "It means we're not finished yet. There sits one more, the last one." Amir leaned closer. "Where is it, Samuel? Where should we look?" The boy lifted his gaze toward the window. On the horizon, the sun sank slowly into the water, painting the sky in red and gold. "It sets where everything ended," he said, "where the blood touched the stone." Lucia understood without words. Golgotha, Jerusalem. Amir said nothing. He knew what came next would not be just an archaeological quest. It would be spiritual. That night, the team stored the parchment and the hummingbird in a special container. None of them could sleep. The air seemed charged with a presence that didn't belong to the present. Samuel slept in his mother's arms, the small wooden bird resting on his chest. His breathing was calm, yet his face showed an expression Lucia had never seen before, a mixture of peace and longing. Around midnight, lightning flashed over the lake. Amir, unable to sleep, stepped outside the tent. In the reflection of the water, he swore he saw, for an instant, the silhouette of a boy walking barefoot on the surface, a hummingbird perched on his shoulder. When the next flash lit the landscape, the figure was gone. At dawn, Samuel woke and looked at his mother with new serenity. "Mama, now I know why we start doing this. It sups not to discover the past. It sups to remember who we are." Lucia held him in silence. Dr. Amir approached and placed his hand on the stone box, still damp from the lake. "Then we still go," he said firmly. "We still go to the place where it all ended." The wind blew from the lake, raising small waves that broke on the shore like ancient sighs. It was as if the waters themselves were saying goodbye, knowing that the next step would lead them to the heart of the mystery, to the place where history and faith would meet again. And as the sun rose over the Sea of Galilee, the boy who spoke with symbols closed his eyes and whispered one last time, "He steps waiting for us." Jerusalem dawned beneath a muted light, as if the sky were holding its breath. The bells of the temples sounded in the distance while the city woke to ancient murmurs. From the window of the vehicle climbing slowly toward Golgotha, Lucia Ramirez watched in silence. Beside her, Samuel rested with his eyes closed, holding the small wooden hummingbird in his hands. Dr. Amir Khalid sat in front, reviewing the permits and documents that had taken days to secure. Each step of the journey had grown more difficult. News of the discovery in the Sea of Galilee had ignited the entire world, and now every gaze was fixed on them. The team had authorization for a limited exploration beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, precisely where Jesus was believed to have been crucified. They were not allowed to dig, but they could use ground-penetrating scanners. No one suspected what they were about to uncover. When they arrived, the air inside the church was heavy, saturated with incense and prayer. Pilgrims from many lands prayed in silence before the altars. Samuel slipped away from the group and walked straight to the central rock of Golgotha. He knelt, placed his palm on the stone, and closed his eyes. Lucia moved to stop him, but Amir gestured for her to let him be. For a few seconds the child remained motionless. Then he spoke in a low voice, clear enough for all to hear. "Here," he said, "beneath this exact rock." Amir approached carefully. "Are you sure, Samuel?" The boy nodded without opening his eyes. He left his final word here. The archaeologist activated the equipment. The sensors began to hum softly as data appeared on the portable screen. Minutes passed that felt like hours until the technician looked up, his face drained of color. "Dr. Khalid, there is a cavity directly below," he said, "a rectangular chamber at about 3 meters deep." Amir pressed his lips together. He could scarcely believe it. "No plan records this," he murmured. "None." The religious authorities present hesitated to allow an excavation, but at last they agreed to open a small access from a side passage, a section closed for centuries. For 2 days they worked with extreme care until they lifted a slab that revealed the entrance to a narrow tunnel. The air that escaped was cold and dry, carrying the scent of old earth and halted time. Samuel spoke first. "I have to go in alone." Lucia seized his arm, frightened. "No, son, please." The boy met her gaze with a calm that dissolved every argument. "Mama, this is not found with the eyes. It is found with the soul. If you come with me, the silence will not speak to me." Dr. Amir intervened. "He will go with a camera and a microphone. We will see everything from the surface." Hard in her throat, Lucia agreed. They helped Samuel put on a helmet with a headlamp and a small camera. The tunnel was narrow, cut into the living rock. The child advanced without fear, his steps sounding softly in the darkness. On the monitor above, the tremulous image showed a passage descending to a sealed chamber. When he reached the bottom, Samuel stopped. Before him stood a stone altar carved directly from the rock. Upon it, a dark wooden chest lay intact, covered with dust yet astonishingly well preserved. The boy knelt and passed his hand above it without touching. "Here it is," he said, his voice trembling. "The third testimony." On the surface, Lucia covered her mouth with her hands. Amir watched the transmission with a blend of wonder and reverence. "Open the chest, Samuel," he said softly. "Do it carefully." The boy lifted the lid slowly. Inside was a rolled parchment tied with a golden ribbon. Beside it, a small glass vial contained a dark, almost red liquid. Samuel looked at it in silence, and then whispered, "His blood, He left it as a promise. The parchment was in perfect condition. Samuel held it gently and began to unroll it. His breathing grew slow and deep. When he started to read, his voice sounded different, lower, as if another presence spoke through him. I, Jesus of Nazareth, leave these words for the one who understands without having learned, for the one who listens without hearing. I did not come to found temples. I came to awaken hearts. Lucia wept quietly before the screen. Samuel continued. I did not die to redeem, but to remind that love conquers fear. My blood is not a sacrifice. It is testimony that even in pain I chose to love. His voice shook, yet he did not stop. When people forget that they are children of the same light, these words will rise again, not as a command, but as an embrace. For love is not taught, it is remembered. No one spoke above ground. Omer took off his glasses with trembling hands. Tomer kept her eyes closed, tears covering her face. Samuel was silent for a moment, then read the final line. To whoever reads this, do not seek my body among the tombs nor my footprints upon the stones. You will find me in every act of compassion, in every clear gaze, in every sincere forgiveness. There I will always be. The boy rolled the parchment again and placed it back in the chest. Then he looked at the glass vial and said with a tenderness that broke the heart, Thank you for never stopping loving. He switched off his lamp and stayed for an instant in total darkness. There, beneath the hill where the most told story in the world had reached its end, he understood that his gift was not a burden but a purpose. He had not been chosen to read ancient words but to remember the message they carried. When he returned to the surface, the air felt new, as if the world had breathed along with him. Lucia ran to her son and wrapped him tightly. Samuel rested his head on her chest. Mama, it is finished, he whispered. He only wanted us to remember that love never dies. Dr. Amir approached slowly. What shall we do with what we discovered? He asked, his voice still unsteady. Lucia met his eyes with serenity. We will tell it, but not as proof. We will tell it as a story. The story of a child who learned to listen to what the world had forgotten. In the weeks that followed, the 3 testimonies were safeguarded at the Israel Museum under maximum security. Despite international pressure, no government managed to prevent their preservation. Analyses confirmed the authenticity of all the documents. Even so, Samuel asked that they not be shown to the public yet. Not everyone is ready, he said. First they must learn to listen to the silence. Time passed, and the media storm subsided. Samuel and his mother returned to Guadalajara. Life settled into a quieter rhythm. On clear nights, though, Lucia often found her son in the garden, gazing at the stars with the wooden hummingbird in his hands. What are you thinking about? She would ask. About him, the boy answered with a small smile. About everything we still have to remember. Lucia sat beside him. Neither spoke, because words were no longer necessary. The message of the 3rd testimony began to spread little by little, told more as a story of hope than of religion. People in different places repeated the phrase that held it all. I did not come to found temples. I came to awaken hearts. And so what began with a 4-year-old boy in a museum became a silent call to the soul of the world. Love is the oldest and purest force. It needs neither altars nor sacred tongues. It lives in the simple gesture of one who understands without judging, who helps without expecting, who loves without fear. And if you ever hear a voice within you inviting you to believe in the invisible, do not ignore it. Perhaps, like Samuel, you are the one called to remember what the world forgot. Leave me your thoughts in the comments and subscribe. Stories like this can change the way you see life.